Priests? He looked quickly at the lieutenant's collar badges. Yellow trefoil for the 3rd Fleet Army Force, Roman 4 for 4th Army, 907 for his regiment, with C under it for cavalry. That outfit had only been on Quanon for the last 2,000 hours, but somebody should have briefed him better than that. He shook his head. No, they're magicians. Everything these Quans do involves magic, and the Shunun are the professionals. When a native runs into something serious that his own do-it-yourself magic can't cope with, he goes to the Shunu, and of course the Shunu works all the magic for the community as a whole. Rain magic, protective magic for the village and the fields, that sort of thing. The lieutenant mopped his face on a bedraggled handkerchief. They'll have to struggle along somehow for a while. We have orders to round up all the Shunun and send them in to Blue Lake. Yes, that hadn't been General Maith's idea. The governor had insisted on that. I hope it doesn't make more trouble than it prevents. The lieutenant was still mopping his face and looking across the gathering place toward Alpha, glaring above the huts. "How much worse do you think this is going to get?" he asked. "The heat or the native troubles?" "I was thinking about the heat, but both." "Well, it'll get hotter. Not much hotter, but some. We can expect some storms, too, within 12 to 1,500 hours. Nobody has any idea how bad they'll be. The last periastron was 90 years ago, and we've only been here for 60-odd. All we have is verbal accounts from memory from the natives, probably garbled and exaggerated. We had pretty bad storms right after transit a year ago. They'll be much worse this time. Thermal convections. Air starts to cool when it gets dark, and then heats up again in the double sun daylight. It was beginning even now, starting to blow a little after alpha rise. "How about the natives?" the lieutenant asked. "If they can get any crazier than they are now—" "They can, and probably will. They think this is the end of the world, the last hot time." He used the native expression and then translated into Lingua Terra. "The Skyfire, that's Alpha, will burn up the whole world." "But this happens every 90 years. Mean they always acted this way at Periastron?" He shook his head. "Race would have exterminated itself long ago if they had. No, this is something special. The coming of the Terrans was a sign. The Terrans came and brought Oomphel to the world. This a sign that the last hot time is at hand." "What the devil is Oomphel?" The lieutenant was mopping the back of his neck with one hand now, and trying to pull his sticky tunic loose from his body with the other. "I hear that word all the time." "Well, most Terrans, including the old Quanon hands, use it to mean trade goods. To the natives it means any product of Terran technology, from paperclips to spaceships. They think it's, well, not exactly supernatural. Extra-natural would be closer to expressing their idea. Terrans are natural. They're just a different kind of people. But Oomphel isn't. It isn't subject to any of the laws of nature at all. They're all positive that we don't make it. Some of them even think it makes us." When he got back in the car, the native pilot, Heshto, was lolling in his seat and staring at the crowd of natives along the side of the gathering place with undisguised disdain. Heshto had been educated at one of the Native Welfare Commission schools, and post-graded with Quanon Planet-wide News. He could speak, read, and write Lingua Terra. He was a mathematician as far as long division and decimal fractions. He knew that Quanon was the second planet of the Gettler Beta system, 23,000 miles in circumference, rotating on its axis once in 22.8 galactic standard hours, and making an orbital circuit around Gettler Beta once in 372.06 axial days, and that Alpha was an M-class pulsating variable, with an average period of 400 days, and that Beta orbited around it in a long ellipse every 90 years. He didn't believe there was going to be a last hot time. He was an intellectual, he was. He started the contragravity field generator as soon as Miles was in his seat. "Where now, Boche?" he asked. "Qualph's village. We won't let down. Just circle low over it. I want some views of the ruins. Then to Sanders' plantation." "Okay, Boche. Hold tight." He had the car up to 10,000 feet. Aiming it at the map direction of Qualph's village, he let go with everything he had, hot jets, rocket booster, and all. The forest landscape came hurtling out of the horizon toward them. Qualph's was where the trouble had first broken out, after the bug-out from Sanders. The troops hadn't been able to get in there in time, and it had been burned. Another village, about the same distance south of the plantation, had also gone up in flames. And at a dozen more they had found the natives working themselves into frenzies, and had had to sleep gas them or stun them with concussion bombs. Those had been the villages to which the deserters from Sanders had themselves gone. From every one, runners had gone out to neighboring villages. "The gone ones are returning. All the people go to greet them at Dishafu. Burn your villages, send on the word. Hasten, the gone ones return." Saving some of the villages had been touch and go, too. The runners, with hours lead time, had gotten there ahead of the troops, and there had been shooting at a couple of them. Then the Army contragravity began landing at villages that couldn't have been reached in hours by foot messengers. It had been stopped, at least for the time and in this area. When and where another would break out was anybody's guess. The car was slowing and losing altitude, and ahead he could see thin smoke rising above the trees. He moved forward beside the pilot and pulled down his glasses. With them he could distinguish the ruins of the village. He called Blue Lake, and then put his face to the viewfinder and began transmitting in the view. There wasn't a soul, human or parahuman, in sight. The only living thing was a small black and gray quadruped investigating some bundles that had been dropped in the fields, in hope of finding something tasty. He got a view of that. Everybody liked animal pictures on a newscast. And then he was swinging the pickup over the still burning ruins. In the ashes of every hut he could see the remains of something like a view screen or a nuclear electric stove, or a refrigerator or sewing machine. He knew how dearly the Kwans cherished such possessions. That they had destroyed them grieved him. But the last hot time was at hand. The whole world would be destroyed by fire, and then the gone ones would return. So there were uprisings on the plantations. Paul Sanders had been lucky. His Kwans had just picked up and left. But he had always gotten along well with the natives, and his plantation house was literally a castle, and he had plenty of armament. There had been other planters who had made the double mistake of incurring the enmity of their native labor and of living in unfortified houses. A lot of them weren't around anymore, and their plantations were gutted ruins. And there were plantations on which the natives had destroyed the cluba plants and smashed the crystals which lived symbiotically upon them. They thought the Terrans were using the living crystals to make magic. Not too far off at that. The properties of the Quanon biocrystals had opened a major breakthrough in subnucleonic physics and initiated half a dozen technologies. New kinds of Oomphel. And down in the south, where the spongy and resinous trees were drying in the heat, they were starting forest fires and perishing in them in hecatombs. And to the north they were swarming into the mountains, building great fires there too, and attacking the Terran radar and radio beacons. Fire was a factor common to all these frenzies. Nothing could happen without magical assistance. The way to bring on the last hot time was people. Maybe the ones who died in the frenzies and the swarmings were the lucky ones at that. They wouldn't live to be crushed by disappointment when the sky fire receded, as Beta went into the long swing toward Apastron,